Yo, what's up guys, Sensus here. And today we're going to be doing a Rogue vs Feral Druid dueling guide. A lot of you guys probably expected this after you saw the duels that Banana Raccoon and I had. So much like the Windwalker Monk dueling guide that I made a week ago, I'm going to be going over the specs that I used. And I'm just going to do an overview of the duels in general. And talk about things I did well and things I could have done better. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, starting off with the spec I used for Assassination, I ran with Night Stalker, Combat Readiness, Elusiveness, Burst of Speed, Internal Bleeding, Mark for Death, and Death from Above. And the whole idea behind this spec is to catch your opponent off guard and put out some really huge damage early on in the duel. So the bonus to running this spec is it's extremely offensive and you can put out a lot of pressure early on. The downside is it doesn't have much defensive value. It relies heavily on using defensive CDs for offensive purposes. So that's just one important thing to keep in mind about this talent setup. As for glyphs, I ran with the Glyph of Blind, the Glyph of Energy, and the Glyph of Recuperate. Moving on to the combat spec I used, I ran with Subterfuge, Combat Readiness, Elusiveness, Burst of Speed, Internal Bleeding, Mark for Death, and Venom Rush. Alright, moving on to glyphs, I ran with the Glyph of Blind, the Glyph of Faint, and the Glyph of Recuperate. You'll notice, much like the duels I had with Zwen, I went for a very tanky setup, just because Ferals can put out some crazy bursts and you need to be able to mitigate that. Now let's check out the actual duels. Okay, starting off with the Assassination Duel, I started off by opening up with Cheap Shot into Mutilate into Rupture, and then I used Mark for Death into Kidney Shot, and that got Internal Bleeding rolling along with Rupture. So at this point I'm just spamming Mutilate until 5 combo points, and I'm waiting for him to switch forms, and as soon as he switches forms I use Vendetta into Envenom. And it's pretty important that you have 5 combo points on your target before you cast Vendetta, and that's because of Enhanced Vendetta, which causes your next Mutilate, Dispatch, Envenom, or Ambush to have a 100% crit chance. So in order to get the most out of Vendetta, you want to make sure you have 5 combo points on your target before you cast it. So after Envenom, I click off the Fairy Fire and I use Vanish into DFA, and the reason why I use Vanish is to get the 5 combo points, and also I get the Cold Blood effect as Assassination, which gives me a 100% crit chance on my DFA. And at this point I was able to just finish it off by spamming Dispatch into Envenom, and that's exactly what I was talking about when it comes to catching your opponent off guard. Alright, moving on to the combat duel. For this one I started off by using Mark for Death into Slice and Dice, and I opened up with Cheap Shot, and I popped Adrenaline Rush into Revealing Strike into Sinister Strike, and that got me up to 5 combo points, and I followed up my Cheap Shot with a Kidney Shot, and then I just continued to spam Sinister Strike for the remainder of my stun. And then right before my stun faded, I popped Evasion so I couldn't get bashed, and you'll notice that I used those 5 combo points to get Recuperate rolling. So right now I'm in a pretty good spot. I have Recuperate and Slice and Dice up, and he just popped Incarn, so I pre-fainted his stun, and I put Combat Readiness up. Now one thing I could have done here is I could have blinded him, force his Trinket, and get him in a full kidney, but that's just one of those things that you guys could take away from this video. You want to try to blind them on Incarn so you can force a Trinket so you can get him in a full stun later. But for this duel in particular, I was able to get away with just tanking out his Incarn without having to blind it. But it's still something good to keep in mind. Now before I sign off here, I want to give you guys a few last important tips. If you plan on tanking out Incarn, you want to try to keep Faint and Combat Readiness up at the same time, because you have the possibility of mitigating 80% of his bursts if you use them correctly. And also in 6.2 you want to try your best to get them in a stun before you use Killing Spree, since Killing Spree can be CC'd now by everything except for roots and snares. Anyway guys, that pretty much does it for this video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment and I'll try my best to answer them. And of course, as always, thanks for watching guys. I'll see you next time.